Old Hollywood was built on illusion, beauty sculpted, age hidden, and secrets stitched into every frame. Beneath the sparkle of stardom, many of the era's biggest icons hid a surprising truth. Their glamorous locks weren't their own. Today, we reveal 20 Golden Age legends who wore wigs made of real human hair, crafted to perfection and kept under wraps. 1. Lucille Ball. Lucille Ball may be remembered best for her fiery red hair and comedic genius, but the truth behind her iconic look was more carefully constructed than fans ever knew. By the late 1940s, Ball had experienced severe hair thinning due to decades of chemical treatments, specifically from the dyeing process that turned her naturally brown hair into her signature vibrant red. Her stylist began using high-quality wigs, crafted from real human hair, to maintain her on-screen image. Ball owned an entire collection of wigs, meticulously maintained and custom-colored to match her signature hue. The human hair allowed for realistic movement and better adaptability under harsh studio lights. These wigs became essential during long shooting days on I Love Lucy, especially as Ball aged and her natural hair lost volume and luster. Famed hairdresser Sidney Gilleroff, who worked with virtually every MGM star, reportedly managed her wig styling, ensuring consistency across every appearance. What's remarkable is how Lucille Ball's comedic timing and energy always kept audiences so engaged. No one ever suspected the bright curls weren't her own. In a studio system obsessed with illusion, Ball's wigs weren't just vanity, they were armor. Carefully curated, brilliantly worn, and never spoken of publicly, her wigs became part of a legacy wrapped in laughter and veiled in real hair. 2. Clark Gable. The king of Hollywood was also the king of subtle disguise. Clark Gable's rugged charm, trademark mustache, and slicked-back hair made him the epitome of masculine elegance. But behind that debonair image lay a secret, one that became more prominent as his career soared. He began losing his hair in his 30s. To maintain the allure demanded by roles like Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind, Gable adopted finely crafted wigs made from real human hair. Unlike synthetic pieces, human hair wigs allowed him to style his hair more naturally and maintain his commanding presence on camera. Hollywood's top wig makers created custom pieces that perfectly matched his natural tone, blending seamlessly with his remaining hair. According to studio records, MGM invested heavily in these hairpieces to protect Gable's marketability. There was immense pressure to keep up appearances, especially in an era where hair loss was seen as a sign of weakness or aging. Stylists worked diligently before every take, adjusting the wigs to fit lighting changes and ensure no seams were visible on screen. Though fans swooned over his every smirk, most never realized that the Gable they idolized was part performance, part prosthetic. His human hair wigs weren't about vanity, they were about power. Hollywood couldn't afford to have its leading man exposed, so the illusion was maintained at all costs. 3. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford reinvented herself many times throughout her long and complicated career, but one thing remained constant: her immaculate appearance. Beneath her sharp eyebrows and piercing eyes was another carefully curated detail: her hair. By the 1950s, years of bleach heat and stress had taken a toll on Crawford's natural hair, and she began relying on an arsenal of human hair wigs to maintain her signature glamour. Her wigs were exquisite, imported from Europe and designed by top Hollywood wig makers. Crawford was notorious for her attention to detail, and her hairpieces were no exception. She favored real human hair for its softness, natural sheen, and ability to withstand the rigors of lighting and stage makeup. Some wigs were dyed to exacting shades of brown, auburn, or chestnut, depending on the character or occasion. Crew members on set often noted how Joan treated her wigs like crown jewels, brushing and spraying them herself in her dressing room. Some even said she named them. Despite the hush-hush nature of wig use in old Hollywood, Crawford didn't view them as shameful. For her, they were tools of control, a way to command every frame and defy time. In a system that demanded women look perfect from every angle, Crawford's wigs weren't just for continuity. They were shields. Elegant, formidable, and flawlessly styled, they helped her maintain the myth of Joan Crawford, long after her natural hair had surrendered to time. 4. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart's tough guy persona, from the Maltese Falcon to Casablanca, seemed anchored in authenticity. But behind that gritty realism was a surprising touch of artifice. Bogart wore a partial wig made of real human hair for much of his later career. As his hairline receded through the 1940s, Warner Bros. Insisted on preserving his classic silhouette. The wigs weren't just cosmetic, they were strategic. Crafted by top stylists at Max Factor, these real hairpieces were custom molded to Bogart's scalp and styled daily to ensure that no shadow betrayed the truth. Human hair was essential. Synthetic alternatives of the time looked stiff under camera lighting and couldn't replicate the gritty texture of Bogart's own hair. Ironically, the illusion made him more authentic in the public eye. Viewers believed his rugged look was natural, even as it was being constructed piece by piece in the makeup chair. His wife, Lauren Bacall, reportedly joked in private that the toughest man in Hollywood started his day with a hairpin. Bogart never acknowledged his wig use publicly. His image was too carefully built, too tied to a kind of masculine realism that didn't allow room for vanity. But in reality, like so many stars of his time, the hair was borrowed, lifted from someone else's head and woven into the Hollywood dream. 5. Marlene Dietrich. Marlene Dietrich was more than an actress. She was an icon of seduction, sophistication, and transformation. Known for her sharply contoured cheekbones and sculpted blonde waves, Dietrich's look was one of the most imitated of the 1930s and 1940s. But that platinum perfection wasn't always her own. By the mid-1940s, Dietrich frequently wore wigs made of real human hair to preserve her image. Dietrich didn't just wear wigs, she engineered them. Working closely with legendary hairdresser Sidney Gilleroff, she commissioned elaborate, hand-tied human hair wigs that matched her ideal of perfection. The pieces were often customized down to the individual strand to ensure they would photograph exactly as she wanted. Off-screen, Dietrich's natural hair was often hidden beneath scarves or hats. She once confessed that she shaved part of her hairline to better blend her wigs. The human hair allowed her the realism she demanded, especially under the unforgiving lens of black and white cinematography. Her wigs weren't just practical, they were part of her mystique. Dietrich believed in illusion, and for her, the right hair could communicate strength, sensuality, or superiority. With each role, she wore a new version of herself, constructed from bone structure, lighting, and someone else's locks. It wasn't vanity, it was art. 6. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's voice could melt hearts, but his hair, always perfectly styled, was part of his signature charm. As he entered middle age, old Blue Eyes faced what many stars dreaded: hair loss. Sinatra's solution was discreet, but meticulous. He adopted custom-made wigs crafted from real human hair to maintain his slick, gentlemanly appearance. While many fans suspected a toupee, few knew the detail involved. His human hairpieces were imported from Europe and styled daily by personal barbers trained to blend them seamlessly with his remaining natural hair. Sinatra's team took care to keep lighting angles and camera setups in sync with his look, preserving the illusion in public and on screen. Biographers note that Sinatra was particularly sensitive about his appearance, especially in photos. He even carried extra hairpieces during tours. Though rarely spoken about, insiders confirm he used real hair because synthetic wigs looked too obvious and felt unnatural under stage lights. Despite his bravado, Sinatra was incredibly image-conscious. He wanted to project youth and control, a man who never aged, never wavered. The human hair wigs weren't about deceit. They were about staying in tune with a world that demanded he always look like the legend he was. 7. Bette Davis. Bette Davis was known for her sharp tongue, intense performances, and piercing eyes. But her hair? That was often someone else's. Davis suffered early onset hair thinning, especially after filming of Human Bondage and Dangerous, where harsh dye jobs and tight hairstyles wreaked havoc on her scalp. By the 1950s, she turned to real human hair wigs to maintain her formidable screen presence. These wigs weren't just studio props, they were tailored extensions of her character. Davis collaborated with her hairstylist to ensure each hairpiece aligned with the emotional core of her roles. For All About Eve, she wore a custom ash blonde wig made from human hair, designed to exude power and aging grace. Behind the scenes, Davis was unapologetically direct about her wigs. Crew members recalled her treating them as seriously as her wardrobe and lines. She understood that illusion was a requirement of the job, and if a wig helped her dive into a role, she embraced it. In an industry obsessed with youth and perfection, Davis used wigs not to hide flaws, but to amplify presence. For her, human hair wigs were not about shame. They were tools of transformation. And when Bette Davis transformed, the world couldn't look away. 8. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis was a matinee idol whose dark wavy hair became his visual trademark, but that thick mane began fading far earlier than fans knew. By the late 1960s, Curtis began using real human hair wigs to maintain the polished look that had made him famous in films like Some Like It Hot and Spartacus. What made Curtis unique was his openness behind closed doors. Among friends, he reportedly joked about renting hair from someone else, but in public, he never broke character. His wigs were made by elite Beverly Hills wig makers and cost thousands, each one tailored to his head shape and hairline to ensure a natural appearance. Curtis didn't just wear wigs, he wore styles. Depending on the role, mood, or decade, he switched between mod, classic, and even experimental cuts. He saw his human hair wigs not as a secret, but as tools of reinvention. In a business that quickly discarded aging stars, Curtis used wigs to remain bankable. They gave him the flexibility to play younger roles longer, to defy expectations, and to keep up the illusion of eternal youth. And in doing so, he reminded Hollywood that charisma often came with a hidden part, stitched in, strand by strand. 9. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth's copper red waves are among the most iconic hairstyles in film history. Yet few knew that her signature look was largely constructed, using real human hair wigs to maintain the illusion. In reality, Hayworth's natural hair was dark brown, coarse, and resistant to styling. After years of bleaching and reshaping her hairline for roles, her scalp became fragile and bald spots began to appear. To protect her image, Columbia Pictures turned to expert wig makers. They created human hairpieces that matched her dyed tone and added volume and softness. These wigs were styled daily and became essential for consistency during long film shoots. Even in her most famous film, Gilda, Hayworth's hair was a blend of her own and expertly placed human hair additions. The legendary hair flip wasn't just an act of seduction, it was a stunt made possible by hours of wig prep. Off-screen, Hayworth kept her hair covered in scarves, tired of the damage. Her wigs weren't just tools of beauty, they were shields from a system that demanded she sacrifice her identity for stardom. Through human hair and hidden threads, Hayworth became the bombshell the world desired, at the cost of her own reflection. 10th. Cary Grant. Cary Grant exuded elegance, wit, and timeless charm, but by the time he became a household name, his hair was already thinning. Though he managed to preserve a youthful look well into his 50s, it wasn't entirely nature's doing. By the late 1940s, Grant began discreetly wearing finely crafted wigs made of real human hair. Unlike some contemporaries, Grant's use of wigs was extraordinarily subtle. He favored partial pieces, carefully blended with his natural hair, and relied on expert wig makers to maintain the illusion. He understood the power of grooming and the expectations placed upon a leading man. Real human hair allowed his wigs to blend more seamlessly under studio lights and withstand the demands of physical scenes and close-ups. He was reportedly meticulous about their maintenance, often carrying extras while traveling. During his later years, even as he transitioned to public speaking and business ventures, Grant continued using human hair wigs to maintain the sophistication that defined his brand. Though Grant rarely acknowledged the use, those closest to him knew it was part of the carefully constructed image he upheld with precision. His charm may have seemed effortless, but even that required craftsmanship. A true leading man down to every last strand, real or otherwise. 11. Greta Garbo. Greta Garbo was the enigma of the silver screen. mysterious, stoic, and endlessly alluring. Her hair, cascading in perfect waves across her cheekbones, added to her ethereal quality. But by the 1940s, after years of bleach and studio transformations, Garbo began suffering hair loss and breakage. Privately, she turned to human hair wigs to sustain her otherworldly image. These wigs were custom-built and expensive, sourced from European artisans and styled to perfection. The human hair made it possible to replicate Garbo's signature softness and movement, something synthetic wigs couldn't capture under 1930s lighting and film stock. It was all about authenticity, ironically through illusion. Garbo's personal collection included multiple styles for different occasions. While she retreated from the screen early, she was often spotted in New York wearing her wigs in subtle, classic configurations that preserved her mystique. She never discussed the wigs publicly, but in her letters and interviews, it was clear she viewed appearance as armor, a way to shield her from the world's demands. The woman who wanted to be alone stayed hidden behind a curtain of borrowed hair, preserving a fantasy of perfection the world still clings to today. 12th. Rock Hudson Rock. Hudson symbolized mid-century American masculinity. Tall, square-jawed, and impossibly handsome, he was Universal Pictures' answer to the golden boy ideal. But as Hudson entered his 30s, the pressures of keeping that image intact mounted, especially as his hair began thinning noticeably. His solution? Human hair wigs, worn subtly but consistently across his leading man roles. Hudson's wigs were carefully matched to his original hair color and texture, using human strands for realism. The natural movement of real hair was critical. Audiences had to believe in his effortless charm, and studio lighting demanded authenticity. His personal hairdresser often traveled with him on set, maintaining the hairpieces and styling them to flow naturally in action sequences. There was also emotional weight behind it. For Hudson, who lived a deeply private life due to the era's taboos, his appearance was a mask, another layer of protection. The wig wasn't just about looks, it was part of a larger performance. Friends have recalled how Hudson would remove his wig only in trusted company, joking that even the hair has a contract. But beneath the humor was truth. In a world built on appearances, even a hairpiece became a contract with the myth of stardom. 13. Lana Turner. Lana Turner was known as the sweater girl, whose icy blonde allure captivated millions. But few fans realized that her iconic locks were often human hair wigs, painstakingly designed to maintain a look that had come to define sensuality in 1940s cinema. Turner suffered from hair breakage and thinning after years of studio-imposed dye jobs and rigorous styling. Rather than risk looking anything less than perfect, she embraced wigs made from the highest quality human hair. These pieces were imported from Europe and maintained by a personal stylist who traveled with her. The wigs allowed her to stay camera-ready even on off days and ensured consistency across multi-week shoots. In The Postman Always Rings Twice, her look was so consistent and smooth that even professional stylists couldn't tell she was wearing a wig. Turner didn't see them as shameful. In fact, she considered them a necessity for survival in a business obsessed with youth and polish. For Lana, the wig was a tool of power. It preserved her image, gave her control, and allowed her to remain forever luminous in the public eye. Beneath every strand was a calculated choice to remain a goddess, no matter the toll behind the scenes. 14. James Stewart. James Stewart was beloved for his everyman charm, but even the most relatable heroes aren't immune to aging. As Stewart transitioned from boyish romantic leads to more serious roles in films like Vertigo and Anatomy of a Murder, his hairline receded, and so did the Hollywood illusion of invulnerability. To maintain continuity and audience perception, Stewart wore human hair wigs in several roles. Stewart opted for wigs that were as understated as his acting style. They weren't flashy, but were finely crafted to mimic the natural ebb and flow of his thinning hair. Human hair was necessary to preserve the realism required by Alfred Hitchcock's meticulous direction, especially in Vertigo, where visual detail was paramount. Stylists on set recalled Stewart's humility when fitting the pieces. He joked about it, never letting ego interfere, but he also understood the expectations placed on him. His goal was not vanity, It was believability. In a film era where authenticity was becoming more prized than glamour, Stewart's wigs helped him bridge both worlds. He wore them not to deceive, but to deliver. And in doing so, he proved that real acting sometimes meant borrowing even the most basic parts of yourself, strand by strand. 15th. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor was the embodiment of glamour. Her violet eyes, dramatic gowns, and iconic hair made her a fashion and beauty standard for generations. But by her late 30s, Taylor faced health issues, extreme styling damage, and surgeries that led to thinning hair. To preserve her legendary look, she turned to meticulously crafted human hair wigs. Taylor's wigs weren't just backups, they were part of her routine. Made from 100% real human hair, they were custom designed to match her previous styles in both color and texture. These pieces allowed her to remain flawless on camera at galas and even during hospital visits, where photographers often lurked. She had dozens, styled, brushed, and cataloged like museum artifacts. The wigs offered flexibility, especially when her natural hair needed to recover from dyeing and heat damage. In public, her hair always looked untouched by time. In private, friends say she cherished her wig collection and viewed them as symbols of resilience. For Taylor, the wigs weren't masks, they were crowns. They allowed her to continue ruling Hollywood with unshakable grace, even as her body weathered battles behind closed doors. Her beauty may have been legendary, but it was her ability to preserve it, strand by strand, that truly made her unforgettable. 16. Burt Lancaster. Burt Lancaster, athlete, circus performer, and eventually Hollywood powerhouse, projected vigor and masculinity. Yet, by the 1960s, his thick hairline had noticeably receded, prompting the use of custom-made human hair wigs, particularly for high-profile roles in epics like Elmer Gantry and the Leopard. Lancaster's wigs were expertly designed to handle the dynamic demands of his roles. He didn't just need something to sit still under stage lights, he needed human hair that could flow, move, and hold under action scenes and sweating studio heat. The wigs were created by top Hollywood stylists and often fitted with adhesives that allowed them to remain secure even during horseback scenes or fight choreography. Despite being seen as rugged and authentic, Lancaster understood the performance extended beyond dialogue. It included image. Off-camera, he was reportedly matter-of-fact about the wigs, viewing them not as concealment but as costume. They allowed him to stay competitive in a youth-obsessed industry. The man who could command armies on screen knew that something as simple as a hairpiece could preserve the illusion of timeless virility. In that way, Lancaster's wigs weren't just cosmetic, they were part of the armor that let him remain a lion long after nature tried to tame him. 17. Vivien Leigh. Vivien Leigh's delicate beauty defined Scarlett O'Hara for generations, but few knew the extent to which that iconic look relied on illusion. Leigh, who struggled with bipolar disorder and tuberculosis throughout her life, suffered hair loss due to stress, illness, and treatments. By the time she starred in A Streetcar Named Desire, she was regularly using wigs made from real human hair. Her wigs were masterfully tailored, soft, elegant, and natural under the camera's eye. She worked closely with designers to match textures that complemented her facial features, era-specific styles, and mood of the character. On stage and screen, the difference between real and artificial was indistinguishable. Privately, Leigh regarded her wigs as emotional buffers. They allowed her to step into a role even when she felt unwell, to hide her struggles behind glamour. In interviews, she avoided the topic entirely. She understood how fragile the perception of beauty could be in Hollywood. For Leigh, who was as fragile as she was brilliant, the wigs provided more than appearance. They provided strength. They allowed her to return, again and again, to a stage that demanded nothing less than perfection, even as her body gave her less and less to offer. 18. Yul Brynner. Known for his bald head and commanding voice, Yul Brynner is famously remembered for The King and I and his regal, clean-shaven dome. But Brynner's choice to go bald was not always voluntary. Earlier in his career, as his hairline began receding, he wore custom human hair wigs for stage and screen auditions. Brynner's early wigs were made from human hair due to their authenticity. As a young actor in the 1940s, he needed to look adaptable, youthful, and attractive to casting agents. Stylists used high-quality pieces that allowed him to blend in among other lead men. Eventually, Brynner turned what had been a liability into his signature, shaving his head completely and embracing the bold, striking look. But for years before that transformation, he quietly relied on real human hair to meet industry expectations. His journey is unique among this list. His wigs were a bridge from insecurity to identity. In the end, it was the removal of those wigs that made him unforgettable. But we must remember, before the boldness came, the fear, and before the legacy came, the borrowed locks of a man still searching for how he truly wanted the world to see him. 19. Jean Harlow. Jean Harlow, the original blonde bombshell, wasn't born a platinum goddess. Her natural hair was a soft brown, and it took relentless bleaching to achieve that silver screen sparkle. The price? Severe hair damage, scalp burns, and irreversible thinning. By 1935, Harlow was using custom wigs made from human hair to maintain her look without destroying what little was left of her natural hair. Harlow's wigs were some of the most luxurious of the era. They had to be. The light-colored human hair required constant toning, and studio lighting at the time made every imperfection visible. MGM spared no expense in hiring the best wig makers to keep Harlow's image consistent. Even in libeled Lady and Susie, Harlow's appearance was often enhanced by a finely applied wig piece. Offset, she was candid with close friends about the toll her hair had taken. She frequently wore scarves or turbans when out of the public eye. Jean Harlow died tragically young at 26, but the wigs she left behind remind us how far stars had to go to embody an image. Her wigs weren't masks, they were life rafts in a sea of impossible beauty standards. 20th. Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston, best known for his larger-than-life roles in Ben-Hur, The Ten Commandments, and Planet of the Apes, had the kind of square-jawed, heroic look studios craved. But as he aged, particularly by the late 1960s, hair loss became a growing concern. To stay consistent with his epic roles, Heston turned to full and partial wigs made from real human hair. These wigs were engineered to endure grueling production schedules, extreme weather, and heavy costuming. In Ben-Hur, his hair had to look windswept but controlled, regal yet natural. Synthetic wigs would never do. Instead, his team worked with top industry stylists to create hairpieces that could be styled, curled, or flattened, depending on the moment. Insiders noted how private Heston was about the wigs. He insisted on early call times to have them applied before anyone else arrived on set. The illusion of power was crucial, and to him, the hair was part of the armor, just like the tunics and chariots. For a man so closely associated with strength and conviction, the vulnerability of hair loss was quietly erased. Through human hair, Heston remained a cinematic titan, immortalized not only by his performances, but by the thousands of carefully placed strands that framed his legendary face. In old Hollywood, image was everything, and for these stars, human hair wigs were the secret threads holding that illusion together. Each strand whispered of pressure, vanity, survival, and artistry, and while the wigs may have been hidden, they helped build legends that still shimmer, decades later, beneath the flicker of the silver screen.